Who do we sell to? I think this is very important to get right. So normally you would be selling to your direct next kind of inline part of the supply chain. This to, anyone listening that is trying to bring a new material to market, I don't think that this works. I think you need to build demand for your product further up in the value chain. So you need to solve not the problems of your immediate customers, but their customers' customers. And what does that mean? That means in our case, we solved Amazon's problem of wanting to have radically better footprint of their data centers, for example.
Carbonsations, today's carbon industry leaders.
Are you passionate about climate action and staying on top of the latest trends in the world of carbon capture, removal, and markets? Then the Carbon Herald has you covered. Every week, we bring you the top news, breakthroughs, and insights from the world of carbon management, delivered straight to your inbox. No fluff, no jargon, just the essential info you need to stay informed. So whether you're a climate professional or just someone who cares, make sure you're subscribed. Visit carbonherald.com and sign up today for our weekly newsletter. Welcome to the Carbonsations podcast, where we speak to some of the leading figures in the emerging carbon industry. Today, we're joined by Marta Sjögren, Co-CEO and Co-founder of Paebbl, a company that's developing carbon-storing building materials by permanently mineralizing captured CO2 into valuable industrial products. Marta, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you on the show. Before we dive into Paebbl and the world of carbon storing construction materials, however, you probably already know that we like to start by learning a little bit more about our guests and the people behind these companies. So with that said, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and ultimately what led you to co-found Paebbl.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, firstly, thank you for having me on the podcast, Violet. It's great to be here. So my background prior to starting co-founding Paebbl was in investment. I was on the venture capital side for about 13 years. Most recently, I was with a fund called Northzone for 9 years, where I left as a partner working kind of generalist, mainly B2B, but generalist kind of investments. And prior to that, I was with another fund called DN Capital, also as a generalist investor. So I've seen sort of technology disrupt industries for a little bit over a decade prior to actually starting Paebbl. And that's really sort of part of the reason to even start Paebbl is realizing the patterns that exist between these different industries, even that might seem very different to each other. But in fact, there is a bit of pattern recognition that can be fairly useful. So that's my background. I'm kind of nothing technical by training. I studied political science and philosophy at university, and at my bachelor's and my master's is in finance and management. So really nothing technical in that front. So I'm the least technical founder of Paebbl's co-founding team, of which there are 4 of us. The good news is my co-founders are a lot more technical than I am. So I get to fill the gap with a commercial sort of acumen and making commercial sense out of what we're doing.
Okay, and so for those of our listeners who may not yet be familiar with Paebbl, I was wondering if you could also just briefly explain kind of the company's mission and business model and tell us the problem you're ultimately trying to solve.
Sure. Yes. So Paebbl is on a mission. We even have this in our articles of association, actually. We're on a mission to restore the planetary carbon balance by 1 gigaton by 2050. So how do we do that? Is that we actually reutilize captured CO2. So that's one side of it. And then we process it to create a mineral. And therefore, the second side of it is that mineral happens to have cementitious properties and can replace some cement. So there's a double whammy on firstly reutilizing CO2 that would have otherwise been in the atmosphere on the one side, and on the other side, replacing heavily emitting legacy material, which is one of the most abundantly used materials on Earth. And why concrete? Well, concrete, we produce about 30 gigatons of CO2 of concrete every year. And there is no any sign of decreasing this. In fact, it's increasing. And the only thing the only industry that is comparable to this size in terms of volume is really the CO2 emissions. As you know, we're in the tens of gigatons of CO2 emissions per annum. And so what we at Paebbl realized was actually those two can be a pretty good match in terms of what if we repurpose some CO2 into building materials, and those building materials in turn can have a net positive effect on our society, whilst also over time being price competitive with legacy building materials.
I was wondering also if you could walk us a little bit through your process and explain exactly what happens to the carbon along the way.
Of course, yes. So we do not care about how the CO2 is captured. I mean, we do care about it, but we don't take care of the CO2 capture part. What we do is that we process the CO2 that has been captured. So once CO2 is captured through whatever capture technology, instead of, for example, shipping it off to the North Sea or somewhere for CCS, you utilize it. And that brings us to what we do. So we effectively geomimic a natural process. That process happens in nature all the time. It's called mineralization. And CO2 will react. So CO2, so the gaseous form of carbon, is a heavy molecule and will react with water and eventually silicate minerals. And over a very long period of time will form a carbon layer of minerals. All we do at Paebbl is accelerate this by about 10 million times, such that in a couple of hours, we do what nature would have taken many, many, many thousand years to do. So that's really what the technology is. How do we accelerate it in our chemical reactors is through moderate temperatures, so sub 200 degrees Celsius, meaning that just from that side alone, you can use renewable energy easily to power the process. Then through some pressure, but still modest compared to things like oil and gas. And then through certain abundantly available chemical accelerants that are organic, non-toxic, and contribute, that are of course counted for in our LCA. So what comes out is basically, or rather what comes in is 1 ton of CO2 plus somewhere between 2 and 3 tons of silicate feedstocks that we use to bind the CO2 with, then generate 3 to 4 tons of building materials. So you don't need to separate or anything. You just dry the powder after it's come out of a reactor, and you then ship it to the customer.
Wow.
So that's what we do in essence.
Okay. I have a lot of questions now. So first of all, where do you get your CO2 from? Do you purchase it from someone who captures it? Do you have contracts in place? Does somebody just, ship it to you as a waste material that they're trying to get rid of? How does this work?
So the first thing for us was importantly to just make sure to test the various sources of CO2, of this, which there are, plenty. There's obviously technical CO2, sort of biogenic focused CO2. There's DOC. We've tested all sorts of CO2 possible to understand whether the process works equally well depending on, what conditions it comes in. We have decided to focus on biogenic sources of CO2, frankly, because those will be at the right scale for when we scale up commercially, which is the next step for us. So biogenic sources of CO2 can be biogas plants or similar. And I'm not at liberty to disclose our commercial agreements as yet, but in some cases we're getting paid to take care of the CO2, we're always getting paid by somebody to take care of the CO2. It just depends on what exactly the business model is. We can be an off-taker of the CO2 easily, right? Or in some cases, we might be paying and then effectively charging on the carbon credits front further upstream and further downstream, I think is the actual word.
Okay, it's really fascinating. So is it accurate to say that your cement is carbon negative or carbon neutral?
Yes, actually we're not a pure play cement. We're a so-called supplementary cementitious material or an additive in the concrete mix that has cementitious. So we replace some cement, but not all. That's the first thing to say about that. Is it carbon negative? Yes. We're super proud that we are one of the only cementitious materials, I believe the only, maybe even still on epdhub.com, that is carbon negative. That's just even our first generation of the EPD, which is very not optimized. And that's minus 14 kilograms of CO2 per ton of product. That's from our pilot plant. Obviously, the bigger you build these plants, the more efficient you become and the more carbon negativity you will see. So we were really pleased when we saw that the first EPD was already carbon negative, but you should stay tuned because we are going to come out with some news very soon on even more future-proofing the carbon negativity.
Oh, wow. I'm really excited already. So that kind of leads me to the point of commercial viability, which is always, the main challenge for climate technologies, especially in the carbon space. How does Paebbl approach that?
So there's really a dual side to this. One is, you're firstly dealing with carbon capture and processing, which in and of itself are novel technologies in many cases, or at least, young technologies on the one hand. On the other hand, you're selling into a commodity market that is very conservative and extremely cost sensitive, the building materials market. So commercial viability is really, really key. And we have seen plenty of companies kind of assume that you can charge a premium for these commodities long term, or get some kind of a subsidy, or some kind of, basically instruments that we at Paebbl don't really believe in long term. We have a slight transition premium, transition meaning as we transition to our scale, like to be at scale, we need to be kind of on the upper end of what we will be charging for, let's say 5 to 10 years from now. But we have a very clear plan of how we're going to become price competitive in the coming 5 years and really a price leader within less than 10 years from now, which if we follow our plan will be remarkable because, the building materials industry has not really seen kind of an emergence of at scale technologies that are able to compete with legacy building materials, just because those are at such significant scales and with the amount of kind of barriers to entry, including high capex costs. It really is a valley of death. And I'm not going to lie to you. It's really challenging because you're being pushed from all sides to deliver something that would be sort of like a 4-dimensional Rubik's Cube. And so I think the answer there is you have to sequence it. You need to sequence what is commercial viability at what stage. We've seen renewable energy, for example, go through this, taking, 15 years of concentrated efforts by various stakeholders to now be in many places the most viable energy source or the most price competitive energy source. And for building materials, it's going to be exactly the same thing, except our ambition is to compress this time. And luckily, I think we are just about to enter a super cycle of 3 kind of colliding drivers of why the market for low carbon or hopefully also carbon negative materials is about to explode. And those include both the data center build out, where the hyperscalers are really pushing the boundaries of high performance next generation of materials that are energy efficient. Why? Because, then there's more energy to use on the AI, frankly. So if you're more energy efficient than what's out there, they will be adopters because then there's more energy for their core business. Then the other side of it is defense. We've seen a increasing defense budgets. A defense, believe it or not, also includes concrete structures like, breakwater structures or just literally more concrete to be used both during peace and wartime. And there the EU is also increasing its sustainability regulation, such that just last month, a new bill was passed to make sure that at least 15% of materials used in public procurement in infrastructure in the EU are actually EU-made low-carbon materials that are building materials. Now, you might ask yourself, is this even feasible to do? The reality is that right now, how the value chain is dealing with this is largely by importing slags, fly ash, and whatnot from other parts of the world, where effectively those are being dumped onto Europe. But things like CBAM are changing that. And so that opens up for a significant market opportunity for companies like ours.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a lot to unpack. Okay, so you mentioned the kind of the financial aspect of it, like your price point as a stepping stone to scaling. But as far as technical and operational hurdles go, what would you say are kind of the biggest ones that Paebbl has encountered so far? Or perhaps you're dealing with right now, like kind of on the way to scale? Are there any at all, or like?
Yeah, I pause and think because we're frankly in a valley of death. Why do I say this? There is, once you have a proven repetitive scale up model, like for example, with solar has gone through, or wind to a certain extent as well, then it's very easy to raise project finance for these types of infrastructure plays. When you are scaling up from, pilot and demo stage to a first commercial facility, it is exceptionally difficult out there to finance this. So what you really have to do is look at it as a platform play where the first of a kind facility will not yield the IRR on a project that you would want to have at scale, but where effectively it's your kind of way to enter the production side of scalability. And you have to look at it as a platform play. That's kind of how we're looking at it as well with our stakeholders and saying, okay, what is the next meaningful milestone that we can deliver on with as little of a capex risk as possible and as high of a return as possible. So that's really what our scale up is about now in the next phase. What we've done really well is take 3 scale up steps in 3 years, proving that we can. For a deep tech company in particular, this is exceptionally fast. So we're taking some kind of parts of the playbook from the software world or technology world and applying them to deep tech. So that's served us very well. And that has given us sort of also the execution track record of being able to go fairly fast and reliably deploy CapEx financing. Now we're going to go and build our next scale up. So even our pilot and demo are producing small commercial volumes to be utilized by real customers in real world environments. But the next scale up step will be producing up to 100,000 tons of material in the first phase. And then in the second phase, scaling that up to about 350,000 tons of material. So to us, it's all about staging what capital comes in when to finance what. And that's what's the difficult part, is making sure that you have stakeholders that are motivated enough to be part of the journey because they might get something out of it. For example, if you're a hyperscaler, you are relying on more decarbonized materials to hit the market to be able to supply your data center build out. But you realize there's no supply right now. So you might want to invest in that. So that's what we're kind of seeing. Then perhaps there is, long-term capital, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds and whatnot that are looking at the next industrial wave coming to Europe, and they might have aligned interests. And really, I think the trickiest part is just pure play financial investors that I think have been burned by some of them in the US investing into this hypothesis that the DOE will fund 80% of some first of a kind project. And then when that got pulled back in the past couple of years, it's really hurt some of our peers. It's been a really brutal journey for them. And then other things like, large megaton projects not panning out, like Northvolts of this world, that's also pulled back some financial investors. So I think what I ask myself at this point in time is, what risk are financial investors that are just pure play, like, resilience investors willing to do? That's their part of de-risking technologies like these.
Mm-hmm. So how does it look like on the customer side? Like, how are customers responding? Are you seeing like a growing demand from the construction and, building material sector for products like yours? Is there, would you say there's still a significant education process there, like still needing to happen before customers are actually ready to adopt these solutions?
Yeah, this is maybe my favorite part of our journey is that 3 years ago, we didn't even know we had a cementitious product on our hands. So that was we didn't even know what SCMs were. Let's put it this way. And then 2.5 years ago, we discovered we do have cementitious properties on our hands. And then in the past 2 years, it's really been amazing to see the curiosity around the product from a variety of stakeholders. This is, I should say, a signal of there being more early adopters there than I think I foresaw. I was expecting it to be a lot more conservative. It is a very conservative market, but what we did was to really bring in an aligned value chain. And this is starting with the real estate owners, asset developers highest up that ultimately have the say, such that the general contractors and the cement and the concrete companies do just need to provide what it is that the projects want. So for us, this has meant that we've deployed about 20 tons of product over the past year and a half, roughly, across about 10 projects, which has yielded over 600 tons of carbon storing concrete in the real world. This is not taking into consideration any of the lab trials or whatnot that we've done on top. And now, so that has had a tremendous return on investment for us. It has netted in about 750 times more volume demand signals from customers for industrial amounts or commercial amounts of material. So we've signed capacity reservation agreements for quite a significant amount of the next scale up facility from amazing companies that are either going to be the custodians, let's say, of the materials themselves, the developer asset owner side, or the transactional layer, the customers that are basically either building with this, so construction companies, or building materials companies that supply the actual building material solutions.
Mm-hmm. So who would you say like your main customer is? Is it these building material companies? Is it construction? Is it like a specific type of construction that your product goes towards?
So firstly, we've tested our product in about 7-8 different applications, which together correspond to most of the concrete market applications. So it does work in most concrete applications that we have tested, or actually all the ones that we have tested. And then there's a smaller part of the market that we still need to develop and work with. Who do we sell to? I think this is very important to get right. So normally you would be selling to your direct next kind of inline part of the supply chain. This to, anyone listening that is trying to bring a new material to market, I don't think that this works. I think you need to build demand for your product further up in the value chain. So you need to solve not the problems of your immediate customers, but their customers' customers. And what does that mean? That means in our case, we solved Amazon's problem of wanting to have radically better footprint of their data centers, for example, and other projects I can't discuss at the moment. And then that got the value chain to realize that, so Amazon wants to adopt products such as Paebbl into their portfolio of real estate developments. So then the building companies or the construction companies are increasingly saying they've gone from being very, very conservative. And I understand that because there's no margins in the construction sector, to saying, what will it take for us to take as little risk as possible and to share the risk with others in the value chain? And that brings me to the final part of it, which is the building materials giants out there. And this is a very concentrated pool of companies. Anywhere in the world, you only have a handful of cement majors. They have, of course, a huge portfolio of building material solutions. And most of them, by the way, have gone from calling themselves cement companies to building materials. Like good example is Heidelberg Cement used to be called cement. That's what used to be called. Now, in the past 5 years, it's become Heidelberg Materials. And you have a range of these other companies. So all in all, we sell across the value chain to where the need is the greatest. And then we partner with other parts of the value chain to create win-win for product adoption. That's been our strategy, and it's, served us well so far.
Okay. And so kind of maybe to summarize, in a sense, I guess your customers, like your direct customers and their customers, what's been your observation of their like buyer behavior? What tends to matter to them most today? Like, is it cost? Is it performance? Is it environmental impacts? Is it regulation? What tends to kind of be shaping buyer behavior currently?
Currently, buyer behavior is at a crossroads of going from, we're not taking any risk. It needs to be within the standards. It needs to be, widely de-risked across all parameters and cost effective, which is, again, like looking for a unicorn, to customers saying, okay, we realize we need to be part of de-risking these solutions, building the technical dossiers, and seeing that we get access to these materials at scale as fast as possible. So you have things like, elemental impact now. In the past week, actually, I think they have announced this data center innovation initiative, which is really an investment initiative designed to accelerate the next generation of materials adoption. So they're actually investing capital on behalf of the hyperscalers to bring these materials to market as fast as possible. So that's what's happening. So the end of the value chain is starting to take a direct approach to bringing these materials to the market and signing offtake agreements directly. I mean, whenever have you seen on Amazon or Microsoft or something sign a building materials offtake, like up until a couple of years ago? So this is one of the things that's happening. Another thing that's happening is that they're looking for is just technical validation. Does the material actually perform? And because the standards take a long time to prove that something actually performs, there's various ways of de-risking this through metadata sharing. So this is another thing that's happening, to just make sure that technically you're not taking risk. That's the most important thing, to technically not take risk. And then the whole commercial side is something that you need to just look at it as a phased process. With, of course, the faster you get to scale to price parity or price competitiveness, the better. That doesn't go out of passion.
Mm-hmm. So you touched on policy and regulation earlier. I wanted to maybe take a little bit of a deeper dive into that and see your opinion as to how important policy is becoming increasing, like in the low carbon materials space, in the climate tech in general, particularly in Europe, like you mentioned CBAM. Do you believe that governments are moving quickly enough to support the adoption of like carbon neutral building materials in your case, or other technologies in this space?
We've seen both sides of this. I think the EU has in the past couple of years really accelerated in creating, let's say, enabling regulation as opposed to disabling regulation for materials or for technologies such as these. And I think it's coming at a time, so that's a tailwind, right? But it's coming, unfortunately, at a time when headwinds are also coming in. So the contesting of ETS, for example, or question marks about how CBAM is actually implemented. It's sort of like butting heads, But I see some very positive developments in things like the EU's, the Net Zero Industry Act. I see CRC adopt things like long-term carbon storage in materials. So I see a lot of positive momentum, and I think it is actually it will set a standard globally, like the EU has on a number of fronts, that is positive for this overall space. The question is it fast enough? So my message to any kind of policy folks out there is it's not fast enough. We would love it if there was enabling mechanisms for faster permitting, for example, of build out of these manufacturing sites. Sometimes this can be very cumbersome and time taking a lot of time. Then certifications and entering the standards. We've been talking about performance-based standards for a long time. It's still dragging on. So if we don't go to performance-based standards, then how quickly can we make sure to add new materials into existing standards to just get them into the existing standards? So there should be some kind of highway lanes for novel materials to enter this. And I can tell you right now how we are dealing with it is that we are going to geographies, to countries where effectively there is a proven path to rapid regulatory compliance. The Netherlands, I have to give kudos to the Netherlands, which is, I think, the fastest moving market in terms of bringing new building materials to market. Their certification has been basically a third of the time for us than it would have taken in many of the other kind of cement heavy markets. And it's these markets that I think are going to propel the demand side to get to commercial scale. So more to be done. Good starts, but more to be done, certainly. And locally, any country that can create kind of piloting incentives, whether through financial mechanisms or even just sort of relaxing the regulatory front, just as long as we're, of course, delivering safe solutions, I think that is always helpful.
Something that came to mind actually in that line of thought, do you guys license your technology or is that something in the works perhaps that you might be considering?
We are certainly considering that. I think realistically, licensing the technology before it's proven at a commercial scale is challenging, or I think not realistic actually at all. So we need to build the first plant. And then once that is built, we will then be in a position to decide whether we license or whether we own and operate future plants. But we are thinking about it. Yeah, just to kind of, how we are thinking about our own scale up journey is that it's so important that you standardize, modularize the technology as fast as possible, which we have done and are doing. and that you can basically have a kind of copy and paste model as fast as possible, because that gives you the better IRR on these projects over time. So that's really the name of the game. And then you can, of course, license it, and that licensing then yields that IRR at a kind of licensing level.
Yeah, absolutely. And just from a pure climate perspective, I think that would be very useful and just kind of help propel the growth of this sector immensely. That brings me also to another part of this equation, because you sit in a very interesting intersection between like carbon negative products, carbon removal, and carbon markets. So I was curious as to your opinion of or how you see the role of carbon markets specifically in your company's future, but also maybe in the sector of CCU.
So I think it's no surprise to anyone listening to this podcast or reading anything to do with this space is that the carbon markets are, I think, going through a bit of an identity crisis. I don't know how else to put it.
Oh, okay. You're not the first person to say that, actually, in those exact words. Yeah.
So, and I think that this is going to happen a couple times more until we get something that holds water irrespective of what macro stage we're in, So I think that there is a washout happening in the carbon markets. I believe that much more focus on MRV, in particular, like the nature-based is a big question on kind of like where that goes. I don't know enough about that space to be the judge of it. I think on the kind of the industrial side of it, or the engineered solutions front, there is really on the price pressure, like really what is a viable cost for carbon capture? That's been now in the past year really questioned, like, hey, what we've been saying, or what those carbon capture companies have been assuming to do at scale, has any of that actually been proven to say that we're on that right kind of cost curve slope? I think that's yielding some of these questions. And then, of course, the maturity of the market is at its very infancy when, Microsoft it's been in the news. I don't even know if they've stopped or not stopped, or it's a bit of confusing to know what Microsoft is doing.
Well, they made their first purchase after announcing kind of like that they're pausing or not. But yeah, it's a bit of
hard to know.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of uncertainty.
And the point about that is that it's more a signal of the market being immature than Microsoft doing whatever it wants to do, right? So I think we're going to see a more maturity in the market in the coming year than we ever have to date. I can say this much, that the notion of insetting, which is what we help companies with as opposed to offsetting, has really grown in popularity. Now, the next wave of this is really, really understanding where the combination of carbon credits, EACs, and the physical products actually goes. I think that is what a lot of companies and stakeholders are working through. On our end, we are extremely quantifiable. I mean, you literally know how much CO2 comes into the plant, where it comes from, how much energy it takes to process that CO2, and then how much mass is produced. Because that's the reality. We're producing physical mass at the end of the process. It's extremely quantifiable. And I think the solutions out there that are very quantifiable will have a good market opportunity in the years to come.
Yeah, I was just going to say that with carbon accounting becoming like a bigger and bigger thing, and climate reporting becoming a bigger thing, your solution is actually also in the intersection of that. Like, you've got carbon removal, you got carbon markets, you got carbon accounting, all of these things, which is fantastic and makes your product an ideal product really for anyone in the future.
That's the hope. I mean, it's the hope. It's not the hope. It's the plan. We believe that having a very clear correlation between the physical waste or the resource waste that CO2 is, which it's a physical product, right? And then the physical output materials have a very, easily digestible correlation. And so the closer the correlation is to the real world and on an abstract kind of thought somewhere else, or in a distant future, I think the more there will be appetite to invest in this space. Now it's really about bridging the gap between being at the demo scale that we're at and consistent industrial production to get to the millions of tons of CO2, which is our plan to get to in the coming decade. And we think we have a good plan for it.
It definitely does sound like that. And in that line of thought, I do have one final question for you today, Marta, and that is about Paebbl's plans for the upcoming weeks and months, perhaps. If there's anything, you did mention that there's something exciting ahead. I wonder if you could maybe hint at it at least, or share something that you can share already, if that's at all a possibility.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So we'll be coming out with a few pieces of news that are product related in the coming probably months. That's one. Then in terms of site selection for our next scale up step, I've just come back from a trip to the Frontrunner site last week, and it's been incredible to see the site and to see all the stakeholders and just how eagerly the whole community is, how eager they are about us coming to site. So we will be announcing the site that where we're going to build the next project as well in Europe. And then there might be more news on the kind of commercial announcements coming up. So it's a busy period for us, certainly. And we need to, we'll keep in touch.
Okay. Definitely looking forward to it. Marta, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure to speak to you, and very fascinating to learn about all the work that you guys do. I look forward to following Paebbl's journey in the next few weeks and definitely in the years ahead.
Thank you so much, Violet, for having me, and thanks to the listeners for tuning in. And feel free to reach out if I can help.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Carbonsations podcast and would like to hear more conversations like this, please be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate the support.